T. Only on Firstpost.
Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I am Joshua Barnes, live from the Firstpost studios. First, let's look at the top headlines. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to visit Johannesburg to attend the G20 summit from November 21st to 23rd. He is expected to hold bilateral talks with several global leaders. China rules out a trilateral meeting scheduled this month with the culture ministers of Japan and South Korea amid its diplomatic row with Tokyo over Taiwan. Europe says that any plan to end the war in Ukraine must include Ukrainians and Europeans. The remarks made during a meeting in Brussels follow the Trump administration's peace proposal, which involves Kyiv giving up land. Stock markets rally after Nvidia beats quarterly earnings expectations with a record high revenue of $57 billion on fierce demand for its AI chips. And a Spanish court orders Meta to pay local media outlets over $550 million in compensation for unfair competition and an additional $69 million as interest. Hello and welcome. Today we begin with yet more shocking news from Nigeria. A deadly church attack has shaken the country days after the abduction of 25 schoolgirls. The attack adds to US President Donald Trump's claim of Christian persecution. According to police, the attackers abducted the pastor and some worshippers. But before we tell you more, take a look at the visuals playing on your screens. It shows pastors and devotees worshipping at a church in the central Nigerian town of Eruku. Suddenly, the sound of gunshots disrupt the prayers. Soon after, people can be seen running to safety, while an old woman struggles to find a safe place. What follows next is rather shocking. You see gunmen storming the church premises, while gunshots continue to ring. The attackers then go on to pick up the belongings of the people. They also try to enter the church vestry, where people had rushed to safety. The authorities have briefed up security in Kwara State after the incident. The deadly attack comes just days after gunmen attacked a government girls' boarding school in northwestern Nigeria. According to police, the attackers killed the vice principal and abducted 25 students after engaging in a gunfight. The police haven't been able to locate the abducted students yet. In the wake of the brutal attacks, Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has postponed his planned trips to South Africa and Angola. He is scheduled to attend the G20 and AEU summits. There, his officers said the president stayed in Nigeria to receive security briefings on the two attacks and ordered more security to hunt down the assailants. The attack downplays Tinubu's promise to fight against terrorism in the country and has put more pressure on the Tinubu-led government, as it adds to Trump's claims of Christian persecution in Nigeria. Trump has even threatened military action over the alleged killings of Christians, a claim that fetched the support of celebrities like rapper Nicki Minaj. Trump also directed his administration to come up with a possible plan of action for an attack. Nigeria has also been added to the US list of countries of particular concern for alleged religious violations.
If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. We're going to do things to Nigeria that Nigeria is not going to be happy about and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns a-blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible, horrible atrocities.
Nigeria is grappling with a security crisis as it reels under insurgency in the northeast, abductions and killings by armed gangs in the northwest, and deadly clashes between Muslim herdsmen and Christian farmers in the central belt. However, Nigeria says that the violence is not linked to any particular religion. It says that the country's complex security challenges have been misrepresented and that the Nigerian constitution guarantees freedom of religion for all. However, the recent church attack may just make the Nigerian government's stance less believable. And for more on this, we have with us Kwara Okonkwo, a political analyst from South Africa. Kwara, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Could this church attack push Donald Trump towards the military intervention he has threatened?
Yes, there is a possibility of that, but remember, Nigeria is a sovereign entity, and with the recent happenings in Nigerian economy as regards to the killing of the Christians, it sparks debate amongst foreign countries, such as the US, where Donald Trump is saying that he's threatening military action if the president do not act. Therefore, Nigerian government is saying that this statement is inflammatory, that it is not only Christian but Muslims ahead. Rather, instead of providing military attack against Nigeria, that he rather supports partnership in trying to deal with terrorism in Nigeria. So if Tinubu's government or presidency does not step in to stop these killings, there is an extent that it might push Donald Trump presidency to military intervention in Nigeria.
Yes, and how does this latest attack in the wake of the kidnapping that we mentioned impact President Tinubu's stance on violence in Nigeria?
Definitely, it's going to impact him positively to take a hard stand on violence in Nigeria, because the international community is not happy with the spate of killings and abduction going on in Nigeria. Therefore, he needs to stand firm and make sure that such things do not stop by creating watches and making sure that the necessary infrastructures are put in place to stop this. So I expect him to put a strict impact on clamping down on terrorism in Nigeria.
Kwara, how do you think that's possible? Of course, the president has said that it's not religion-based, but of course we've seen attacks recently that might suggest otherwise. How feasible is it for so many areas in Nigeria to be monitored to stop this kind of attack?
Nigeria has the capacity in terms of the manpower, in terms of the institutions like the police, like the military, like the army, to stop this. So what it simply means is that Tinubu should engage the military or the necessary resources that can handle such insurgents as created in in the Nigerian constitution, which means that he can give a go-ahead to these areas and monitor and make sure that such incidences do not happen by making sure he redeploys the military or the police and should be aware to these areas and cautions and make sure that the operative or the secret operatives should make sure that those people, if they hear of any rumors or intent of uprising or such, they will clamp down on it. So it's a narrative where he has to discuss with his security operatives like the military, like the police, and other infrastructure to clamp down on this. So it's a possibility.
Kwara Okonkwo, thank you ever so much for providing that insight. Of course, all eyes will be on that response and any potential US action. Let's now shift focus to the war in Sudan, which has triggered the world's worst humanitarian crisis. But now there are hopes of peace, as US President Donald Trump has vowed to end the conflict after a request from Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Let's listen in.
8 wars, and I'll tell you, His Majesty would like me to do something very powerful having to do with Sudan. It was not on my charts to be involved in that. I thought it was just something that was crazy and out of control. But I just see how important that is to you and to a lot of your friends in the room. Sudan, and we're going to start working in Sudan.
These comments came last night during the US-Saudi Investment Forum in Washington. Trump said he had not given much thought to the Sudan war before the Crown Prince raised it with him.
Working with the Crown Prince was amazing because he mentioned Sudan yesterday. And he said, sir, you're talking about a lot of wars, but there's a place on earth called Sudan. And it's horrible what's happening. So we're working on that. We started about 30 minutes after you explained to us the great importance of that. I view it differently now than I did just a day ago.
And after the summit, the US president raised the dire state of Sudan on his social media platform, Truth Social. He said Sudan is running out of food, doctors and medical supplies. He called it the most violent place on earth and said the United States will work with the Saudi Arabia, the UEA, Egypt and other nations to stop the atrocities. He described the crisis as a priority and promised to act quickly. Trump's remarks came after his administration's mediation efforts. The US presented a peace proposal to the warring Sudanese military and the paramilitary RSF. Both sides acknowledged the peace pact, but only the RSF has said that it will accept the humanitarian truce. Despite talks of peace, the situation on the ground continues to remain dire. Shelling, drones and airstrikes are now hitting civilian areas in Kordofan. This as the RSF has shifted its focus eastwards after battering and then capturing El Fasher. And here the war has also led to killings, looting and mass displacement, with millions living in constant fear. The United Nations says more than 3,300 civilians have been killed between January and June of this year alone, while the war has been raging since April 2023, killing tens of thousands of people and displaced nearly 12 million. The UN has documented summary executions and attacks on health facilities, markets and aid convoys by both sides. More than 2/3 of the country, which accounts for more than 30 million people, now need urgent food, shelter and medical help. The Red Cross says some areas have lost 90% of their civilian population. Families flee daily and many do not make it.
We were staying in Al Takaful neighborhood when a shell hit. My husband went missing. At the beginning we tried to flee, but there was no transportation. We stayed until Al Fasher calmed down. Then we managed to escape.
We came from El Fasher to Tawila camp. We faced troubles on the way. We ran into those criminals. We faced beating, burning, rape, and other things.
But our situation here is terrible. We don't have blankets. He uses bed sheets as covers. As for food, we don't have any. We have nothing, nor anyone abroad to send us help.
For millions of Sudanese people, any form of international intervention is possibly their only hope. And Trump's comments have raised expectations that a negotiated peace could finally begin. The world is watching Sudan closely. The question now is whether these new diplomatic efforts can bring an end to a war that has gone on for far too long. Moving on to Togo. The West African country is tightening its ties with Russia. The country's president was in Moscow for high-profile talks with Vladimir Putin. This as the Kremlin is trying to expand its footprints in the African continent. Togo is the latest country to move closer to Moscow. The focus of the meeting between the two leaders was an expansion of ties between the two countries. Both countries are set to open embassies on each other's soil.
Strangely enough, throughout that time we have not opened embassies. However, we have finally agreed on this next year. We will open embassies in both countries, while the volume is still modest for our countries.
Vladimir Putin told the Togolese president that trade between the two countries is rising and could grow further once the new embassies are operational.
It's a positive trend. I strongly hope that after the embassies open and the Intergovernmental Commission begins its work, we will be able to do everything possible to not only maintain this process, but also accelerate it.
The meeting came after the signing of a military cooperation deal earlier this year. Togo sees Russia as a new security and economic partner. Trade, defense and education are the pillars of this new partnership.
Because what is more important today than education for the future of the country? So we thank you for maintaining these scholarships for the benefit of Togolese students and Togolese youth. Because in today's world, technology plays an important role, and in this field, education can make the difference. We hope that with the opening of embassies, we will do better in this area.
Under the deal, Lomé sought training, equipment and intelligence support from Moscow. This as Togo reels under terrorism due to the movement of terrorists on its northern border with Burkina Faso. So far this year, terrorists have killed more than 60 people in Togo. But this visit is bigger than education or training. It fits into a wider Russian strategy. Moscow is filling the space left by France across West and Central Africa. Countries that once depended on Paris for security are now choosing Russian military support instead. The Kremlin is capitalizing on public anger towards former colonial powers and the perception that Western partnerships have not delivered security or development. 20 African states were once French colonies, and at least 6 have expelled French forces in recent years while moving towards Russia. Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger have all signed defense pacts with Russia. In Sahel, French troops are out and Russian mercenaries are now taking their place. Moscow has expanded their presence from 5 African states in 2018 to at least 12 in 2024, with military agreements in more than 20. Russian state media claims Moscow now has troops in at least 6 African countries. Its reach extends from Mali and the Central African Republic to Sudan, Libya, Madagascar and Mozambique. The message is clear. Russia is becoming the go-to partner for governments of African nations seeking alternatives to the West. Putin is trying to turn that sentiment into long-term influence. This week alone, he met leaders from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and followed it up with African diplomacy. For Togo, opening the embassy marks a new chapter. For Russia, it is another step in their long-term strategy, rebuilding their network one African country at a time. And for France, it's a stark reminder that their foothold is fading fast in Africa. Finally, French President Emmanuel Macron is set to embark on a major tour across Africa. But this isn't your run-of-the-mill state visit. The world leader is aiming to spur new dynamics in a continent that still remembers French colonial rule. French-African relations are far from strong. Many nations have turned their back on the West, off the back of tensions caused by French colonial rule. But before we tell you more about his visit to the 4 African nations, let's first look at why his trip is so significant. The historical influence of France in Africa cannot be understated. At one point, French colonial rule stretched across 20 separate African countries. The European nation granted independence to those nations across the 50s, 60s and 70s. This due to different factors, including a weak post-World War II economy, colonial conflict and nationalist movements. The door has been opened for other players like Russia and China to build economic partnerships with African nations. China, notably through the Belt and Road Initiative, which has seen major investments into African development, while Russia has seen high levels of defence cooperation, highlighted recently with the announcement that $4 billion of military and defence deals have been agreed with dozens of African states. Macron has tried in the past to separate himself from previous French leaders, acknowledging what he called the crimes of European colonialism.
I belong to a generation of French people for whom the crimes of European colonization are indisputable and are part of our history. I recognize myself in the voices of Albert Landres and André Gide, who denounced thousands of deaths on the Congo's railroad, and I do not forget that these voices were a minority in France and in Europe at the time.
Macron made series of promises that include returning looted heritage items, declassifying archives and strengthening academic partnerships. But these gave way to statements many considered as insulting to Africa. And Macron is aiming to once again rebuild ties with a group of nations. Let's take a look at where Macron will be visiting. The tour begins in Mauritius today, where the French president will stay until the 21st of November. Macron is aiming to promote the partnership with neighbouring French islands, Mayotte and Réunion. He will then head to Johannesburg for the G20 summit on the 22nd and 23rd. Macron has been supporting Pretoria, who are dealing with the controversial US boycott. It is also expected that the president will meet with his Algerian counterpart amid rising tensions between the two nations. From the G20 summit, Macron will then head to Gabon, where he's scheduled to meet with President Brice Oligui Nguema. The army general won an election in April after a coup that saw the ousting of French ally Ali Bongo. The final leg of the tour will see Macron head to Angola for the European Union-African Union Summit, in which areas including security, trade and green development are set to be discussed. For Macron, the goal is clear: rebuild relationships with African nations to strengthen cooperation and unlock potential within the continent. But diplomatically, the path is a tricky one. Much of Africa has already turned its back on France. Can Macron's visit spark a reset? History says it will be difficult. That's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Until then, thanks for watching.